Hey, it's Janine again. The meeting is streaming live, and Pernell, you and Andrea can start whenever you're ready.
Mike is actually running things from the start here.
Thanks, Bruno. Janine, are you running the show?
I am Andrea.
Andrea? Okay.
Yes.
Are we all set?
Yes, we are.
Do we have Mr. Byland?
Yes, I did see him on screen. Yes.
Okay. I'd like to call this this confirmation hearing to order. If you could, roll call, please.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Sweeney,
Present.
Mr. Chuma,
Here.
Mr. Gallagher,
Here.
Mr. Schran.
Here.
Mr. Schran, you're muted. Thank you. Ms. Conwell,
Present.
Ms. Brown,
Here.
Ms. Stevens,
Present.
Ms. Simon,
Here.
Ms. Baker,
Here.
Council President Jones.
Here.
You have a quorum, Councilman Gallagher.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the confirmation hearing of Christopher P. Vyland, Esquire, and recently retired police chief of the great city of Solon, Ohio. The paperwork necessary for this that was moved forward by the administration and the executive has been received by the county council, reviewed, and everything seems to be in order and acceptable.
Mr. Chair.
Beg pardon, ma'am?
Mr. Chair, may we go back to item number 3, public comment?
I don't even have an agenda. I'm sorry. Is there a
okay.
public comment?
No public comment was submitted. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will send you an agenda right away.
I apologize for that.
No, that's okay.
The sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, as well as being statutorily responsible for the management of our county jail. Cuyahoga County recently amended our charter to provide greater autonomy for the position, as well as adding additional qualifications for serving as our county sheriff. Beyond the requirements included in Ohio law, our charter requires the sheriff to have at least 5 years experience in law enforcement or correctional facilities management, as well as possessing applicable degrees and certifications. If confirmed, Mr. Vyland will serve a 4-year term expiring on December 31st, 2024. We will proceed as usual. For those that are new, I'll go over how we normally do this in confirmation hearings. The nominee will be offered an opportunity to address his qualifications, motivations for seeking the position, and outlooks and plans regarding the office. Council members will then be offered the opportunity to ask questions of the nominee. We will do so in rounds, each council member asking two questions per round, and we will go back until we are done. Once all questions have been asked, we will entertain a motion to recommend that council approve or reject the nomination at the next regular council meeting. If we are not ready to act on that motion today, we will defer making the recommendation. Assuming a motion to recommend approval or rejection has been made, council will vote on that recommendation at its next regularly scheduled meeting, and that would be tomorrow. Okay. Mr. Vyland, are you available?
Yes, sir, I'm here. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, could you read the item into the record?
Yes, confirming the county executive's appointment of Christopher P. Vyland, Esquire, upon his taking the oath of office as Sheriff of Cuyahoga County for the 4-year term expiring December 31st, 2024.
Mr. Violin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. I appreciate it. I have taken the liberty of preparing an opening statement, and if it suits the council, yourself and the president, I'll go ahead and make that statement and then answer the questions as you've outlined.
This is your time. Good luck.
Thank you very much. First, I want to express my absolute gratitude and appreciation to the Cuyahoga County Executive and his staff, and Chief Corey for nominating me for the position of Sheriff of Cuyahoga County, which is the reason I'm sitting before you today. I do know many of the candidates who applied to serve in this capacity, and I do know that many of them would have provided excellent service to the citizens of this county. I am truly humbled and honored to have been selected and been nominated. So I'd like to thank Mr. Budish and his staff. My opening statement mostly, I think, is just to familiarize all of you with who I am and how I think about law enforcement. And I'll start with me as a person. I was born in Cleveland and lived there and in Cleveland Heights until my parents moved to the Far East Side, where I did most of my schooling. I graduated from Chagrin Halls High School in 1982. My parents and grandparents were also born and raised in Cuyahoga County, my parents in Cleveland and Shaker Heights. I met my wife, a Maple Heights native, in Solon while working as a police officer. She was an emergency room nurse there. And we moved together to Solon in 1991 with her children, when we purchased the first of 4 different houses we have owned in Solon. All of our children grew up there. Our 4 children together are all now grown and have left the nest. 2 of them are out of state, and all of whom have created rewarding and positive lives for themselves and their families. I couldn't be prouder of them. I come before you today with 34 years of public service, primarily in the field of law enforcement. I began my career as a police officer with the city of Solon in 1987. I worked in various capacities throughout those years as a patrol officer, a detective, supervisor at various ranks, and I finished my career there as chief of police, retiring in 2019. I immediately began my second career in public service when I was given the opportunity to become the first Inspector General for the City of Cleveland Division of Police. While I was a police officer in Solon, I was given many opportunities for professional growth and experience, including being trained and certified as a polygraph operator, receiving certification in forensic duties such as fingerprint comparison and analysis, and also being in charge of the department's training programs and activities. I have experience as a community relations supervisor, juvenile court liaison, in conducting employment background investigations, and I spent 10 years as the department's public information officer, which required me to prepare press releases and disseminate information to the public and the media. When I was appointed chief, I ensured that my then public information officer obtained input from all stakeholders, including the actual local media outlets we were dealing with when we updated our media relations policy. I served as both a detective and a detective supervisor, working violent crime, financial crime, and complex criminal investigations. This included being one of the initial law enforcement agencies in the region that undertook the investigation of intricate mortgage fraud activities during the housing crisis in the early 2000s. In the city of Solon itself, we uncovered dozens of properties that had been purchased through the fraud of millions of dollars from financial institutions. Our investigations led to successful prosecutions of many individuals, mortgage brokerages, and title companies at both the state and federal levels. It was the experience gained during that time that allowed me to serve as a subject matter expert in presentations at the Ohio Auditors Fraud Conference, the Greater Cleveland Mortgage Bankers Association Annual Conference, and the U.S. Attorney's White Collar Crime Conference regarding mortgage fraud. In fact, if you had happened to listen to WTAM radio in 2007 at exactly the right time, you would have heard that I was named as Officer of the Week for those prosecutions. I was subsequently selected to become the director of the Cuyahoga County Mortgage Fraud Task Force, as sanctioned through the Ohio Attorney General's office, where we operated as a multi-agency, federal, state, and local group of law enforcement officers that continued to identify individuals and companies that were defrauding lenders in investigations that covered hundreds of millions of dollars of fraud over several states. Eventually, I was selected to be the chief of the Solon Police Department in 2011, and I was honored to serve in one of the most racially, ethnically, and religiously diverse communities in the area. This provided me with experience in coordinating all aspects of a multi-role law enforcement agency, which included patrol, investigations, communications, and the operation of one of the few full-service municipal jails certified by the state of Ohio. In this role, I participated in both the negotiation and the administration of multiple collective bargaining agreements for both sworn law enforcement officers and civilian personnel. This included all grievance, arbitrations, and disciplinary processes. I also authored significant internal policies, as well as various pieces of legislation that were provided to City Council. During my tenure as chief, we were able to accomplish a great many things, including some that were firsts for the department. With regard to infrastructure and technology, we instituted the first body-worn cameras and then the first combined dash camera body camera system for the department. We did a complete radio communications conversion to the statewide Marks radio system. We completed $1 million HVAC renovation of the police and jail facilities, and we instituted an online payment processing system in the Mayor's Court Clerk Office. There were a number of significant operational changes that we made as well. We started the department's first honor guard. We initiated usage of Facebook and Twitter back in 2012 at the forefront of law enforcement social media communications. We utilized data-driven processes to reallocate staff and to geographically redesign our patrol zones. We reorganized the command staff to flatten out the organization to better meet the needs of existing personnel, as well as providing for professional development and succession planning. We consolidated our radio communications and dispatch functions with the Chagrin Valley Dispatch Regional Dispatch Center. This involves contract negotiations, employee transfer, building security integrity issues, transparent information presentations to a divided legislative body, and numerous technical hurdles that were overcome. Once we joined, I also served as the vice chair of the Technical Advisory Committee for the Chagrin Valley Dispatch. We achieved certification from the Ohio Collaborative Community Police Advisory Board for every statewide law enforcement policy standard applicable from the time of its inception, including, most importantly, the use of force and bias-free policing standards. We created new and advanced services for stakeholders, including instituting annual National Night Out festivals. We completed nearly 20 semi-annual citizens academies for citizens and business managers, even holding a teen academy from students from the high school, all of which resulted in a robust alumni program, which served as the basis for our Community Impact Advisory Board. This is a board which provided input on police department policies and operations. And in concert with other departments in the county, we instituted a Safe Passages program, which was a gateway for those with addiction-related issues to receive more rapid treatment and support. During my service as chief, we revitalized and reinstituted the provision of contract jail services to other law enforcement agencies in the region. We redesigned the type of services provided and reassessed the type of contractual relations we would have so that we could minimize the administrative costs and maximize the ease of that administration. We garnered annualized contracts with the cities of Shaker Heights, University Heights, and Twinsburg, where we became the centralized booking location for all, as well as providing video arraignment services to 3 disparate municipal court systems in different counties in the region. And we were able to successfully offset a significant percentage of the costs of our operation of a full-service jail. As chief, I was ultimately responsible for all aspects of jail operation, which included hiring, budgeting, internal discipline, and contracting. I prepared and administered requests for proposals for jail medical service contracts, jail food service contracts, and jail telecommunications service contracts. We operated a 26-bed jail that included both dormitory style and individual cell block areas. We met all state certification requirements annually during inspections, and I oversaw the update and maintenance of jail policies so that they met state and American Correctional Association standards. One of the last programs that I was able to initiate prior to my retirement was the provision of a full-time police presence in city school buildings for the sole purpose of prevention of any sort of active attack against our student population. The school superintendent and I had been working towards this goal since the Sandy Hook tragedy at the end of 2012. This process required amicable negotiations with the city school district and the negotiation of various contracts, the hiring of personnel, executing changes in equipment and infrastructure, but most importantly, it was all a result of a longstanding desire of the school board and the city to do everything possible to ensure the safety of the community's most valuable asset, its children. Professionally, while serving as the chief of police, I was also given the opportunity to serve in additional law enforcement roles. I served in various capacities on the Cuyahoga County Police Chiefs Association, up to and including serving as president in 2019, prior to my retirement. I also served on the boards of the Valley Enforcement Group and the Southeast Area Law Enforcement Group. This provides me with the ability to have networked with many of the area's law enforcement chief executive officers, and I have a record of working with them successfully. I was also given the privilege of serving on the Cuyahoga County Corrections Planning Board after a nomination and approval by this council from 2016 through my retirement. I was involved in the discussions and information surrounding funding, especially grant funding, as it affects the county's jail system in relation to the state prison system and state funding mechanisms. I served at the county level on both the County Sexual Assault Policy Working Group in 2012, dealing with proper respect and procedures due to those who are the victims of sex crimes, as well as the County Automated License Plate Reader RFP Vendor Review Committee in 2017, where numerous vendors were assessed and vetted for selection to receive a large-scale video system contract throughout the county. Most significantly, I was honored to be selected by the governor to serve on the Ohio Organized Crime Investigations Commission in 2016. As a commissioner, I was exposed to the circumstances that local law enforcement was placed in throughout the state as they operated task forces to attack significant criminal enterprises at a higher level with a dearth of resources and funding. I was proud to be able to support those working against human trafficking, money laundering, and other organized crime by assisting in a legislative function with authorizations, funding, and equipment approvals. Generally, my position as chief required me to prepare and present an annual budget for all law enforcement and civilian aspects of the police department, including the jail. I was the ultimate hiring authority for all sworn and non-sworn personnel. I not only was required to evaluate my staff, but was a foundational author of the department's personnel evaluation policy, having written my term paper on that subject while attending Northwestern University School of Police Staff and Command. I was solely responsible for disciplinary dispositions for both union and non-union staff that were in violation of internal rules and regulations. And at one point, I was asked by city administrators to become the grievance hearing officer for non-police related unions in the city. Upon my retirement from the city of Solon, as I stated earlier, I was given the opportunity to become the first Inspector General for the City of Cleveland Division of Police in 2019. In that position, primarily I had the responsibility of standing up a brand new office from scratch. And then my responsibilities mostly revolved around policy and process issues as they were dictated in the consent decree between the Department of Justice and the City of Cleveland. I was tasked with ensuring that police policy met all best practices and standards, as well as to be a check on the civilian complaint processes that led into discipline. I completed compliance audits on significant policies within the department, as well as in the training and certification records of the department. Shifting gears, excuse me. During the entirety of my law enforcement career, education and training has always been a priority. I have well over 3,600 hours of specialized law enforcement training and certifications. As mentioned, I successfully completed the Northwestern University Traffic Institute's School of Police Staff and Command. I have completed the Federal Emergency Management Association's Professional Development Certificate. I was privileged to be invited to travel to Israel to attend a Coping with Global Terror seminar in 2019. And most recently, I traveled to the Association of Inspectors General for training and attained status as a certified inspector general this past March. From the time I was hired as a police officer, I fulfilled a promise to my parents that I would complete my college degree. I attended night school, sometimes only one class at a time, until my eventual graduation from Cleveland State University with a bachelor's degree in philosophy, cum laude, in 1999. After earning a substantial scholarship opportunity, I continued my education and graduated from Cleveland Marshall College of Law, summa cum laude, third in my class in 2004. I have passed the bar. I have an active law license, and I've been involved in various aspects of legal work since then. I served as a magistrate in the Bedford Municipal Court, presiding only over civil small claims so that there was never a conflict of interest with my law enforcement career. I did own a small law firm for a short time. I have experience with negotiating non-law enforcement bargaining agreements, as well as in defending Section 1983 civil rights litigation, defending municipalities and counties from suit. Once I became the chief of police, however, my legal practice minimized to referral and consulting generally, as my primary focus was and is always on my responsibilities to those in my organization. I did want to provide you with some of my thoughts about the position of sheriff, some of the direction I've been given, and my vision moving forward. Firstly, I believe in transparency. This is a public office doing the business of the public, and we should operate in a public environment. It's only when the public we serve can see what it is that we do and how we go about doing it that they can gain any confidence in who we are and the methods that we use. Making information public is a high priority, and the responses that we get to that information from all stakeholders will be utilized in implementing continuous positive change. I'm also currently well aware of the many periodic reports required to be filed by the Ohio Revised Code, and I endeavor to make those as comprehensive and timely as possible so that council is always fully advised of the operations of the department. Second, I want to stress how important it is, I think, to be data-driven. I can't tell you how often in my career law enforcement operations were derailed due to a reactive response to a single instance or anecdotal evidence alone. While single instances or anecdotes can point to a possible systemic problem or an individual issue that needs to be immediately addressed, in order for comprehensive and long-term change, data must be collected and assessed according to different metrics to identify valid issues. It's only then that progress and improvement can be measured and monitored, and goal achievement can be concretely documented. I believe I can strengthen the collection, assessment, and utilization of data to show council definitively the department's improvements. I think it's also extremely important to stress how important I believe inclusion is. The executive and council's declaration of racism as a public health crisis will have a tremendous impact on the operations of the department as a law enforcement entity and as a stakeholder in the wider criminal justice system. Bringing law enforcement service provision up to the highest standards expected and innovating new ways for the department to work internally in the recruitment, retention, hiring, and promotional opportunities will ensure that we're meeting the needs and desires of the entire community and provide confidence in those who are providing the services. We will be reaching out not only to the many community leaders, stakeholders, groups, and organizations as we search for excellent candidates, but also to you directly for referrals. It is incumbent upon all of us to identify those people who exemplify our high standards and to shepherd them into coming on board in any way possible. The law enforcement profession is not a highly sought after career currently, so it will be a priority, including possibly dedicating staff specifically to the recruitment and retention functions. There are some basic and fundamental areas that need to be assessed in any organization periodically. And after conversations with the current staff in the executive's office, I believe that, at least at first, priority will be given to assessing staffing and resource allocation, as well as to the policy infrastructure of the department. I am aware that the staffing and organizational structure of the department has been under discussion since at least former Sheriff Pinckney. And I'm well aware that as a new executive, an objective look at the organizational resource allocation is required from the very start. With regards to policy, the department will be reviewing all of its policies, prioritizing use of force related policies, so as to ensure that we are compliant with all state and federal requirements and restrictions, and ensuring that we are meeting and training to all related best practices. This will include prioritizing an employee's duty to intercede in use of force cases where necessary, and ensuring that use of force documentation, reporting, and review is of the top quality. I believe that I bring significant strength in policy development, compliance, and training to the table. I also want to emphasize ethics, integrity, and professionalism in the department. It is our obligation to keep everyone safe, including those in our care and custody. In order to accomplish that successfully in the 21st century, we must act and be held to higher standards in our behavior and in our service provision. We must exemplify professionalism in criminal justice in the county. I do think that it is appropriate to briefly mention the events of May 30th last year in this conversation. I absolutely understand how a community can feel threatened and let down when force is used during these type of events. And I believe that force should always be the last resort. I will be working with our law enforcement partners at the local, state, and federal levels to ensure that our actions and responses meet only the highest of standards. We will be reassessing our pre-event intelligence gathering and communications procedures. We will also be working harder in the preparation phase, including bolstering policy, training, and actual exercises on a periodic and more frequent basis. We will work to improve joint communications with our other law enforcement partners, including involvement in unified command structures. I think it's appropriate at this point to give kudos to council and also to the executive for the numerous changes and investments that have been made in the jail with the appointment of a new jail administrator, with the improvement of medical treatment in the jail with Metro Health, and with the commitment to supporting organizational structure changes with the addition of some supervisory positions. These changes have had an impact, and they speak volumes to your commitment. These are actually some of the reasons why I decided to apply for consideration. I truly understand that there is no greater responsibility than that of having the full care and custody of a human being. Under your new jail administrator and working on the recommendations of a number of oversight bodies, there is no doubt that conditions and services provided in the jail have improved. The improvements that have been made and supported by the council and the executive are very apparent, and I applaud them. But my goal is to continuously improve conditions and services, especially in support of centralized booking, mental health diversion, and the physical conditions of an improved jail facility that's currently being considered. I want to ensure that crisis intervention, de-escalation, implicit bias, and illegal profiling awareness training are provided to all employees, but especially to those dealing with people at their highest level of crisis, those who are being brought into custody. I think it's also important to mention recent issues with, I apologize, my notes got screwed up. In closing, I would just like to say that I do believe in justice, fairness, and the rule of law. Those are the foundations of our society. We are a nation of laws, and the law has the potential to be the most equalizing and unifying force in our culture. Good, fair, and just laws require the highest standards for the men and women who have been given the awesome responsibility of enforcing those laws. Therefore, we need to operate a justice system that has earned the trust and respect of those it serves, and is right that we do so by being held to a higher standard every day. Law enforcement is a sacred trust. The community has entrusted us with the power to investigate, the power to detain, the power to impact reputations, to search, and to deprive people of their freedoms. Those are powers that are given by the people in return only for the obligation that they be utilized justly, fairly, and appropriately. I am committed to running an office that is actively fair, just, honest, and operates without bias. There can be no more important of a relationship between any government and those it serves. It has been my honor to have served with so many law enforcement professionals in my career that exemplify these principles, most who have done so in virtual anonymity. I consider today it's such a privilege to be able to present to you that I do so in tribute to each of their good works. I also want to make a final comment to any employees of the Sheriff's Department that are currently listening to the meeting that I don't forget where I came from. I do remember standing in the cold at 2 o'clock in the morning, dealing with traumatic situations. I do remember taking care of people in custody. I applaud everything that you've done to improve, and my only goal is to assist you in continuously getting better. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Gallagher. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have of me at this point.
Thank you, Chief. What we'll do now is we'll start with any questions of the council, and I'll ask the president if he would like to kick it off. Muted. Purnell, muted.
And
There we
you
go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. And welcome, Mr. Violent, and congratulations on getting this far in the process.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. First, I'd like to say that if I go back into the history of this government, when we go back 10 years, we came out of a corruption scandal, and the federal government had to come in and clean up a lot of mess. And now we have a government, and we look at it soberly and clear-eyed. We created a government that has created a row of managers, and that your office was one of. And we created a greater level of efficiency. There were a lot of strengths to what was created in this new county government. But one glaring error, or a glaring challenge, I won't say error, glaring challenge, is the reduced independence that we found. And I'm repeating things that we have all seen, but I think it's important to just acknowledge it and put it out there. The people voted for a charter amendment to increase the independence of your office. And that is critical, and it is part of your success, or what we expect to be part of the success of this office. And I want you to know that as council president, and if I may take the opportunity to speak on behalf of all of council, we just want the sheriff of this county to be successful, to have the ability to just do the job. And that is what we want, what we expect. Your position is removed by 8 votes of this council, not by the executive, but by 8 votes of this council. We expect the sheriff to work with the administration, with the council, work with all parties, anyone necessary to be successful. But we want you to bring all of your experience to the table, all that you have learned and done and experienced, to do the best you can on behalf of this county and this community. The Ohio Revised Code is section 341.01. I had it and I just wanted to just read it because it guides us as well as our county charter. And it says the sheriff is to have charge of the jail. It's very clear. And I'm going to read it. It says the sheriff shall have charge of the county jail and all persons confined therein. He shall keep such persons safely, attend to the jail, and govern and regulate the jail according to the minimum standards for jails in Ohio promulgated by the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. So as hard as kicking off our round of questions, you will get many questions from this council, is that one, we just want you to know that we want you to be successful, and there will be dollar amounts needed. We expect that you come to us. Doesn't mean we'll approve everything, but we don't know if you don't tell us. Okay, we need to hear what is critical, what may not be as critical, but we know we need to know, and that is expectation that we would have of you. So again, I just wanted to say that, set a tone, and then allow my colleagues again to ask as many questions as necessary.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone next?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schrein.
Thank you. Yes, Chief, you would have been operating under Mayor Susan Drucker, I assume, at some point along the way in the career?
Mayor Susan Drucker and Mayor Ed Kraus, although during my entire tenure there, I served under 5 different mayors.
Okay, but Susan Drucker would have been kind of your last one, sounds like, based on as far as,
She's the mayor that appointed me to the position.
right.
Although when I retired, Mayor Kraus was the mayor.
So what would Susan Drucker say about you, even though she appointed, when you got all done, how would she recap her tenure with you?
I think that she would, I think that she would say that she was pleasantly surprised at how much work I was willing to do that was outside the purview of the job description. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I had earned her trust so much so that when there were grievance and arbitration hearings for the fire union and for the wastewater reclamation unions, I was selected to be the hearing officer for those grievance hearings because she trusted my judgment. She trusted that I would be objective. She trusted that if I needed to find against the city, and in one case I did, that would happen because she trusted in my judgment and in my integrity. And I would tell you, I don't think at the beginning she thought that I would ever be able to fulfill those kind of roles outside the job description for her. But I think overall she was, I hope, very happy with everything I was able to do for her.
Because the council president opened this dialogue about the jails, Solon would have had some occasions to send somebody down to the county jail.
Yes, quite often. We had a lot of work with county jail when a prisoner was bound over. They were always transferred from our charges down to the county for the felony system. We were only a housing facility for sentenced prisoners. We could house people who were sentenced for up to 1.5 years. And we were a housing facility for those who were freshly arrested pre-bond and pre-arraignment. But once the arraignment happened, then those people were transferred down to the county. Yes, sir.
And because of that responsibility that you had when they came into your care and responsibility, did you ever go down to the county jail, see what it looked like during that tenure? Because the time when you're talking about was when we would have had 9 people die in that jail.
Yeah. Not physically, I did not go down there, although I did have conversations with those in charge. I was a representative of the Cuyahoga County Police Chiefs Association. Several chiefs and myself actually made forays down to the county to have conversations with then Chief of Public Safety Frank Bova and Sheriff Pinckney, working through a lot of concerns and issues that the chiefs in general had concerns about.
But you didn't see a need as somebody who was sending the folks who were arrested in Solon to go down and see what the conditions were in the county jail, especially after the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 9th death. You never went down to see it?
I did not go down to individually inspect the jail, no, sir.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And hey, congratulations on graduating from Chagrin Falls High School. Great school.
Thank you, sir.
Next up.
I have a question, Chair.
Yes, Ms. Baker.
Yes, and congratulations again on getting to this point in the process. There's been concern about your perhaps acknowledgement of the difference between an appointed sheriff and an elected one. Do you see any difference in your position or how you will be reacting as sheriff, given that this job is appointed and of course needs the 8 council members to approve, and also kept informed about what it is that you're doing in the jails? How do you feel your job is either different or the same, given the appointment rather than a voted position?
I think there's good and bad to both. I think that the fact that it is an appointed position means that it has taken the politics out of running for sheriff. And so the time and effort that most sheriffs spend in the campaign and political processes is absolutely minimized here in Cuyahoga County. And I think that's a great boon to the county, because all of that time would be best spent in the administrative roles, in creating a philosophy and a message for those in the department to keep moving forward. But I do want to say this, that during my application and interview process with the executive and his staff, including Chief Corey, it was made very clear to me that responsiveness to council's needs is the #1 priority. I agree completely with that. I have experience in working with a mayor-council relationship where I was in the executive branch of government, but was required to maintain open and productive relations with the legislative branch. I think that's essential to and part of the foundation of good government. So it's my intention to work transparently and independently to resolve all issues. And if there is a conflict between council and the executive as to the role of sheriff, I would defer to both parties in resolving that dispute and providing clear direction to the sheriff's position so that we can move forward.
Okay, that's good to know. And, you know, if I may ask also, because this is an appointed position, is there any certifications that are missing from your qualifications that you need to accomplish? Or are you 100% qualified for what's needed per the charter?
According to the charter, there is a section that details options for correctional certifications that the appointed sheriff is to obtain within 1 year of appointment. I do not have those certifications, but I certainly do not think it will be an issue for me to obtain them during the time period that's been provided.
Can you elaborate on what it is that you need to accomplish?
I have to achieve one of those certifications from one of the 3 certifying agencies in the charter. I apologize, I don't have the charter in front of me, but I have researched each of those online. 2 of those are available through an online coursework, so there's no, COVID hasn't had that much of an effect. And so I don't foresee that it will be incredibly difficult to obtain those as online certifications.
Okay, and the deadline to acquire that, is that?
It's a year, it's within the first year after appointment.
That's all for now, Chair. I'll be back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Conwell.
through the chair to Mr. Veland, what changes have you implemented during your tenure in law enforcement to address systematic racism?
I think the first thing that I want to say is that the grand intentions of one individual aren't necessarily the solution to an entire historic problem, but that has never stopped me from attempting to do what I can. I think the first step is always an acknowledgement and recognition of the role that law enforcement has played negatively in all of these societal issues, and I acknowledge that. When I was first appointed to the position of chief of police, one of the first things that I did was to bring a professional training consultant in to provide implicit bias training for all sworn Solon police officers. Additionally, when I was the hiring authority, I placed a high value on having a diverse working environment and making sure that hiring, the placing, and the promoting of people into positions always took into account racial, ethnic, and gender diversity. I don't think there is any better working environment than a diverse group of people working together for a common cause. Once I became the Inspector General at the City of Cleveland, one of the first audits that I did was regarding their internal disciplinary processes and whether there was any sort of implicit bias going on. Several of my immediate recommendations within the first couple of months of my tenure there was for the need for them to compile internal data on disciplinary issues that had to do with racial, ethnic, and gender populations to determine whether there were any disparate impacts. So it's my understanding that they are upgrading their computers and their record-keeping processes to start to begin to track and see internally how they can do better. So every position that I have held where I have had the opportunity to try to do something to make change, I have done so.
Thank you. I would also like to recommend, if you don't know already, to connect with Eddie Taylor, the chair of the Equity Commission. And I don't know if you've had a chance to do that. My second question to you would be, in terms of uniform, how do you feel about wearing your uniform every day?
I have done both. I am absolutely not opposed to wearing a uniform. I spent the great majority of my administrative police life in uniform. I think that it lends a little bit to esprit de corps, but then I also understand that there are times and places where business attire is appropriate. So the flexibility to do both, I have always found to be of value.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next up,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Miller.
so thank you and congratulations on being appointed and getting this far in the process. And I've heard a couple pronunciations. Is Veland the correct pronunciation?
It's violent, sir. Thank you very much.
Violent, okay. And my first question is, how much importance do you attach to reducing the jail population, and how do you think we can best make progress in that area?
I think reducing the jail population is a priority. I think it's important that only those who are in the direst of circumstances are those that we need to maintain in custody. For most people, most of the time, the reason that they are in custody and they're in custody for a long period of time is a result of the system, and the system not being flexible and quick enough to be able to help these people. So I think that unfortunately, the jail is required to hold those who are committed to it. So we don't often have the ability to flexibly respond, but I think that the county's move to initiate the mental health diversion center, as well as a proposed central booking process where we'll be able to get in staff from the courts and from the defense bar and from mental health professionals and diversion places where we can get people served appropriately rather than keep them incarcerated for unknown reasons for unknown periods of time is incredibly important. I have experienced where we at Solon, when we were running a jail, it was our driving factor every morning to assess the population to see who we could remove from custody, to the point where I had upset a specific municipal court judge because they were unable to get their processes done in a timely manner. They weren't meeting required state guidelines, and we straight released people against their wishes because they weren't meeting what they had to do as a court system. So I am a big proponent in minimizing the time that people spend incarcerated, especially pre-trial.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I continue to be very concerned. Something like 60 to 70% of the county jail population is pre-trial, and we really need to find ways to work that down. So I share your concern. My second question is to ask for a little bit more about what you had to say about transparency. My experience is that law enforcement tends to take the attitude of we know best and don't ask too many questions, and I would like a little more detail on what you intend to do to increase transparency and to be open to civilian and citizen input in the way that the sheriff's office operates.
Sure. I'm going to first apologize because I am not entirely familiar with the county's public records resources and responses and how that system works in the county directly. One of the things that I have done throughout my career while I was maintaining my law enforcement continuing education is to spend a significant amount of that time studying Ohio's Public Records Act. So I have a lot of experience with regards to which records are protected, which records should be immediately available, which records should be redacted for the protection of numerous different parties. And having said that, when I was in the position of chief of police, everything that was required to go went as immediately as possible, even to the extent that unfortunately, I had a situation where I had a law enforcement officer who was charged with a crime. And prior to the news media coming to us with any sort of request for information, we actually were the first ones out with a statement and a press release because I just thought that was important to do for my community at the time.
So based on what you've studied, you should be in good shape because the county's public records policy very closely tracks the state policy. So it's very similar. My next question is based on your experience in the city of Cleveland. How close is the city of Cleveland to being able to emerge from the consent decree, and what would it take for the city of Cleveland to do so?
I'm not sure it's my place to say, as I am not necessarily one of the people in the city of Cleveland's law department or the consent decree monitor, Judge White. But I will tell you this, that prior to my departure, there were conversations and discussions about ensuring that the Department of Justice was on notice as to how well the city had done to come into compliance. And the vast majority of bullet point issues that they had been in compliance with for some time. So I know that those conversations were ongoing. Much of the delay has to do with the people who are monitoring the situation now documenting prolonged compliance over time, not necessarily that new changes need to be made. It's just that those changes have to now be tracked over time. But I was very happy when I came on board to the city to be able to see how well they had done with that process. And it's unfortunate that it doesn't get necessarily the attention that it deserves, that they are accomplishing things at a much greater rate than most people would give them credit for. So
I'm going to ask one final question of a very general nature. You strike me as a person that's very well trained. You have a very broad range of experience. You know the procedures. You know the book. You know what you should do. You know what you shouldn't do. So I don't have much worry in that area. What I'm wondering about is when bold and very strong, almost drastic action is required to deal with a serious situation. Provide me some evidence that you have the boldness and the willingness to take strong action when it's necessary.
Well, it goes back to I'll start with when I was a detective on the street. Very often I would be in a traumatic situation where there was people who were difficult to communicate with because they were going through processes and in crisis at the time. And sometimes in order to take control of a large group of people or a situation in general, or in my case, specific crime scenes, it took somebody to step up and be in charge of taking control of that situation. I expanded that when I got to be a ranking officer with the division. We had a situation where there was a threat to students in the high school from an unknown source with a credible threat that there was a gun in the school, and we had prior notice that that gun might have been there overnight. And it was myself, not as the ranking officer on scene, but as the officer who just wanted to move forward correctly, that took control of that entire school, locked it down, and did a locker by locker search, probably above my rank and authority, but it was something that needed to be done. I have taken disciplinary action against officers, against, I think, what would be the will of the group of employees. Perhaps they might have thought it was unfair, but it was what I thought was the right thing to do, and I stuck by my guns, and I'm willing to do that all the time. I don't ever want to let public opinion sway my moral center, and I will continue to stand up and do the right thing whenever that's necessary.
Thank you very much, and good luck. You have a lot of challenges ahead of you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Next up, please.
Councilman Gallagher, if I may. Councilwoman
Okay.
Brown here.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Hi there, Chief. It's good to
Hi.
see you again. Congratulations on your nomination. You have answered a lot of the questions that I already had, so a couple quick ones. the evaluation process as you worked for Solon and your participation in the hiring of staff. Can you speak to those two matters?
Yeah, so I don't think anybody likes to be evaluated. I don't think it's a process that anybody's really comfortable with. Even for those people who receive positive evaluations, the process is always daunting. So in order to effectively do a good performance evaluation process, it requires collaboration with every level of employee. And you get everybody together and you assess what those job functions are, and you determine how you're going to evaluate people based on what those people themselves think is important. Where I had, I guess the strength was I took what everybody was giving me from working groups in terms of matrices as to how to look at specific job functions. And I was able to then coalesce those together into a policy that we put together. The drafting period went on for many months as we sent that back and forth to the unions as well as to the employees for input. And I am very open to collaboration and input. And I'm not going to tell you that I'm the only guy who has a good idea. Most of the great ideas that are in that came from the boots on the ground, the people who were being evaluated. And then we implemented it. And the key to any good personnel evaluation program is training and consistency. So everybody has to be trained in how the program works, those who are being evaluated, as well as those who are doing evaluating. And then consistency. You have to make sure that your evaluators are very on the same page when it comes to assessing each different type of category that you're assessing to make sure that there's consistency throughout the organization. And that requires constant feedback and monitoring and constant supervisory accountability, holding those evaluators accountable for what they're doing every time an evaluation is done. And I truly apologize, I missed the second part of your question when I was thinking that answer.
Did you participate in the hiring of staff?
Absolutely. I was the ultimate hiring authority. So the process at Solon was that there was two processes. There was a civil service process and there was non-civil service, those who we could direct hire. For both of those, the only difference was the civil service process had an initial examination that was taken to put you on a civil service list. But once that happened, whether we were taking you off a civil service list or whether you were just an applicant that we received from the HR department, you started to go through different steps of a process. There was an initial telephone interview and then a background check, a minor background check, and then we would step that up to a polygraph examination, and then a psychological examination, and then a secondary interview. And then if you made it successfully through all of those hurdles, then I was the final interview, and I got an opportunity to have all that information in front of me and sit down and actually talk to the applicant and make a decision based on that. And then it was my signature that brought those people into being hired. I will tell you that my primary thought process when I am, I guess, assessing an applicant is that I want a good person, a person who's got a good heart. Because if you're a good person and you have a good heart and you're going to do the right thing, I can teach you the skills to do whatever the job is. So I don't necessarily look for somebody who's got the job skills primarily. I just want somebody who's going to be a good human being, and then I'll train the heck out of them and make them a good employee. I can do that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Your background is impressive. It's good to see you. Just a follow-up question about the hiring. We've seen since January 6th that there's been quite a remarkable number of law enforcement who are members of hate groups. As part of your hiring process you put in place or participate in, how will you be able to weed out those individuals who are connected to hate groups?
So I can't speak to the Sheriff's Department's current background investigation process, but that's exactly where that takes place. And once I get in there and I have an opportunity to assess and review their processes and policies with regards to backgrounds, very often those are just, you start with simple stock-based questions and you start digging into people's backgrounds as to what associations they have, what memberships they have, et cetera. And if we find those that are controversial and not supporting of the law enforcement ethos, then we just pass on those people and move on to the next candidate.
Okay. Thank you. And I want to follow up to your answer or your statement about central booking. I thought I heard you say that when you were in Solon that there was perhaps people in jail because it was taking too long, and you might have approached the judge or somebody there. But is that something that's not very practical or realistic when you have 34 judges in common pleas court that determine bonds and really make the final decision about what bond they're going to set and who's going to stay in our jail system pending a disposition?
I don't think that it's not practical, because that's something that, as far as I'm aware of, that's what we do every day at the Sheriff's Department, is have those individual conversations with the judges and the judges' staffs to ensure that they're moving things along. I think my comments started back in 2000, I believe it was 2015. The county did a countywide jail survey to assess the status of the various different municipal jails that were out there. I think it was part of the original process to decide whether there would be a regionalization or collaboration with the county with other jails. And as part of that survey, there were a number of questions about how we could serve those who were incarcerated better. And starting way back in 2015, you have to understand that law enforcement works on a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week basis all year long. And all of those people that enter the system all day, every day, they are funneled into a place where they have to deal with the business week, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, whether that be generally the prosecutor's office or the judges or whoever that is. So taking all of those people and funneling them down to that necessary time frame where they could get things resolved was a roadblock. Additionally, there was a roadblock because there wasn't anybody who was there to help people through a system, because the system's complicated, and there wasn't a lot of people who would take the time to help people who were stuck and didn't understand necessarily what the processes were. So I had made recommendations going all the way back to that original survey that if we could put together court personnel, prosecuting staff, defense counsel, and various different support groups like mental health and veteran services and those kind of things, and get them all available on a quicker timeline, then we could actually get people in and out of a system and have their cases disposed of so that it didn't result in multiple court appearances and capiases because somebody missed a court date and all those kind of things. And I have been a proponent of trying to get people to come together to do those kind of things for many, many years, and seeing what council and the executive are doing with central booking, which is actually the realization of all of those things that I just kind of mentioned, is very heartening to me, because it seems that people are finally starting to get the idea that that's the best way to help people, and I'm fully supportive of that.
Thank you. Are you familiar with Judge the Cleveland Municipal Court judge's early disposition docket, where people are in and out fairly quickly, and there might be about at most 12 hours after midnight where somebody might be held till the next morning, and that these programs are already working through the Cleveland Municipal Court quite well, and that we're really looking at a night court in effect to try to address your concerns and adding on staff.
I think what happens is that most people that are in the system understand and agree, and most people are trying to do the right thing. And a lot of people have come up with a lot of good ideas, and they tend to get implemented piecemeal, especially because we have so many different municipal courts throughout the county that don't necessarily work well in conjunction with each other. So a lot of different municipal courts have tried different things, some to more success than others. But I think central booking is one of those areas where you have a lot of stakeholders who may be finally on the same track together for the first time, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay, and I want to ask finally why, I heard your opening statement, why you want to come into this job with so many issues, critical issues, COVID, past jail deaths, overcrowding?
So two things. The answer to the recent change is that I decided that I didn't like being not the police while I was serving as the Inspector General. There was something fundamental that I was missing, not being a law enforcement officer. That was a, excuse me, a civilian position. And there was something psychologically that I just missed being involved directly in law enforcement. But the long-term answer to that is that I came into this job not one of those guys who grew up always wanting to be a police officer. I found law enforcement at a period in my life where I was kind of meandering without any direction. And I found a place where it was a very structured environment. I found a place where I had people who were more than willing to serve as mentors. And I found a place where I could grow and thrive and be supported in many of the things that I did. It wasn't all good. I have lived through some personally very traumatic events as a law enforcement officer, some things that I'll never recover from. But I think every day that the best things that happened in my life happened through law enforcement. I met my wife that way. They allowed me to continue my education in a way that allowed me to succeed immensely. I have gotten a lot of kudos and a lot of positive feedback from the work that I've been able to do. So feeling fulfilled is one of those things that many people don't get in their careers. And because of all those things, I still feel today as if I have a debt to owe to law enforcement. As much as I have gotten, I still feel that I need to give back. And I have the time and the ability, and my entire adult life has been in service of law enforcement. And there is a need here. And I certainly absolutely look forward to all of the challenges as opportunities just to do better and just to help.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to my president, Chief Violent. Hopefully you'll be called Sheriff Violent pretty soon, so I won't be the low man on the totem pole. I won't be the new kid on the block anymore.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if you mentioned two questions, but I just have a couple of questions that came up during his opening comments. Can I just rattle a couple off?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to stay within your direction. When you talked, Chief, when you talked about the elected position or the appointed position, you mentioned it kind of like half and half. If you had a preference, what would it be? Elected or an appointed position?
I think this is the best way to answer that question. And that is
And I'm not trying
no, I know, but throughout my career, I've had contact with a lot of people who serve in elected positions, whether that be mayors, judges, council people, et cetera, and so on. And I have seen what it takes to campaign and to be an elected official. And I don't think that I have that in me. So from a personal basis, if this was an elected position, I wouldn't even be anywhere near having been given this opportunity. So the fact that it is an appointed position here in Cuyahoga County actually, to me, is a very positive thing because it's opened up a place where I think I can be of service. And I think there's pros and cons to having elected and appointed positions. I think, as I said a little bit earlier, an elected position, an elected sheriff has to take a lot of his time away from serving the public and actually campaigning and running. And in a county like Cuyahoga County, with the number of people and the number of issues that we have, to have somebody who has divided attention isn't necessarily a positive thing. I think where you run into the biggest conflict is when you do have an appointed position, it's not as autonomous as an elected position. But as I said, I have a great amount of familiarity working within that type of executive versus legislative structure where there are protections built in so that the executive, it's a different classification than all of the other directors on staff. That's the nuclear option, and it's nothing that I've ever had to even address, and I don't perceive that would happen here. But it is a difference, and there is some protection there, and that, I think, strengthens my ability to be a communicator and an educator of law enforcement issues with the executive.
Thank you. And I was just getting to the point of the other 87 counties all have elected. And this is the first chance to see how this actually works. And it might be very successful under your leadership. So that was just your personal thoughts, and then set it up for whatever in the future.
Thank you, sir.
You mentioned through the chair to Mr. or Chief Island, when you talk, some of your comments, you're like, the administration gave you a priority. You deal directly with the council, or get your direction from the council. Can you say?
It wasn't necessary. It wasn't that I get my direction from council. It was that I be my priority to be the most responsive to council, so that if you have needs and you have issues and you have those things, that is to be the thing that I am the most responsive to. Not that I necessarily get direction from you, but that I'm responsive to your needs, and that I provide you with all the information that you need to fulfill your roles.
Yes, through the chair. So basically, direct communication from a council member, you're going to be very responsive, but just with the chain of command, right? You're the sheriff. Who would the chain of command be for you, if there is one?
Okay, so during the application process and in my discussions with various different groups in the executive and his office, it was described to me that the chain of command, the person that I immediately report to is Chief of Public Safety, Corey. And through the Chief of Public Safety, I report up through that chain of command to the executive.
Okay. And I'm trying to just figure out, because autonomy is, you don't really have a chain of command. So I'm just trying to, and you have to work intimately with Chief Corey and Chief of Staff to move this county forward, because our county administrator is the executive, and his job is to make sure the whole county works, including the sheriff's office. So I'm just trying to grasp it, the priority with the council members, being autonomous, and I'm new on this, so I'm trying to get my handle on it. But you have to have a tremendous autonomous relationship, but a true partnership with the administration on doing your jobs. Is that fair to say?
It's fair, but I would say that it's not a completely autonomous position. If it was completely autonomous, it would be an elected position. And it's my experience in working at a lower level with a mayor council situation, where I was an appointment by a mayor.
Got it.
However, I didn't serve at the mayor's discretion. I could not be removed without the majority of council's vote. So that while I worked for the mayor and she was my direct report, she couldn't terminate me without council's approval and direction. And this is a very analogous situation now. And what it does is it makes that I am not only incredibly responsive to council and council's needs, but also that I work incredibly collaboratively with the executive in the direction that he wants to go, and provide whatever support I can to his agenda and the things that he wants to do, as long as they're within my purview and within statutory requirements.
Perfect. So you've been through this at a local level then?
Yes, sir.
And I haven't dug deep into this. We all know 8 council members can remove someone in the sheriff's office.
Yes.
Are there steps that need to be taken? Is that I think in the charter? How would that, written?
Yeah, the charter indicates that the only thing that's in the charter specifically that I recall is that the incumbent sheriff have a public hearing where he gets an opportunity to dispute or discuss whatever those issues are that council is going to utilize to remove him from office before they vote. But once that public hearing happens, I think it's just a council's vote whether or not to remove.
Thank you. And I'll do a little bit more due diligence. I should have been prepared for that question. My last one in regards to your statements, when you said you're actively involved in all the hirings in your previous roles, what do you think your role is going to be, since it's so much larger and so much more employees in regards to employees that are hired under your leadership?
Yeah, so according to the Ohio Revised Code, Section 311, and according to the charter, the sheriff is the hiring authority for the sheriff's department. So one of the very first things that I have to do, because I know attrition is starting to take a toll on the department, is to familiarize myself with how the interplay between the HR department and the sheriff's department and the Personnel Review Commission in terms of how do we get those bodies in the door? How do we assess them? How do we go through the process of deciding which applicants we're going to bring on board? And the more information I have about that, the more I'll be able to determine how in the weeds I personally will have to get. I in an organization this size, a lot of it is going to be selecting the people and trusting the people that we delegate tasks to. And so that's going to be part of the other assessment that I have to do.
And that was my thought. And you're the ultimate hiring authority. However, you have a bunch of folks that you're going to trust and do their job, and it's going to work very well for you. And my specific other question is, we talked about the jail and the working relationship we have. I want to talk about the boots on the ground and the relationship you're going to have with the city of Cleveland, the State Highway Patrol, and the other 40 or 56 other municipalities, because you are such a wonderful resource on the streets. And I have some thoughts after you're done making a comment.
One of the things that happened as I turned in my notice with the city of Cleveland was Chief Williams was, I think, a little bit upset that I had decided to leave working for him. But at the same time, he was very thankful at the thought that he and I had already developed a good working relationship, especially not only with him, but with his upper command staff. So those are all people that I am familiar with working with, and am more than happy to continue to do so and to provide whatever we can in terms of support services to local municipal law enforcement. And as I said, I have a long-standing working relationship with very many of those 54 different police agencies through different organizations and through working individually with many of those chiefs of police. As a chief of police, I actually utilize the services of the county sheriff's high impact unit and worked with them very well, Sergeant Herco specifically. And I plan to continue to allow those services to help with various different issues throughout the county. But I foresee working with other law enforcement partners is going to be one of the strengths of the office.
Thank you. And the key word that you mentioned was support.
Yes.
Because some municipalities, the sheriff's coming over to take over.
Yes.
And the one thing I learned in my previous role was with the State Highway Patrol. I got to visit them a little bit, and they're like, we don't want to take over, because they were in the city of Cleveland doing traffic, and they were in the doing DWI. And they just made the statement, we're just here to help, and we have a lot of resources to do so.
Yes.
That was a beautiful thing to hear, and the partnership between the State Highway Patrol, yourself, and the city of Cleveland, I think can continue to do great things. And knowing everybody, and a shout out to Chief Williams, that's a good man to be able to work with. So to my colleagues, sorry for the long-windedness. I just wanted to answer those questions. I relinquish the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
you, sir.
Sweeney. Some good questions there. If I may, at this time, because of Mr. Sweeney's question and the answer of Mr. Violent. Mr. Violent, where did you get the impression that you answer to anybody other than being sheriff of the county?
That was a discussion that was had, and those were the conditions that were presented to me during the interview process as I worked through after application for the position.
And who was that?
That would be Chief Corey and Mr. Budish.
You do realize that you don't answer after this day, if confirmed. In essence, you're autonomous. That's how we got here. Because of the hierarchy set by this administration, we are in the position that we are in today, talking to our 5th candidate for sheriff of Cuyahoga County. And the argument and the debate to go back to the people, to clear up the charter, to clean up what the sheriff is and who the sheriff is, and to fall back on established law in the state of Ohio, affords our sheriff the autonomy to run the jail, his administration, without interference. And the day in which a confirmed individual in this county answers to somebody in a made-up position is the day this house of cards falls apart. This charter was changed to protect you and those that follow you. So for somebody to tell you that under the guise that you don't get, I'm guessing you don't get the job if you don't agree, is that true?
No, sir. It was never conditional. It was just by explanation.
Okay, well, let me, and we met, and I thank you when you came out to meet with me. And I thought I made it very clear. I'm going to make it very clear again. If confirmed, you're the sheriff of Cuyahoga County. You do your own budget, you handle your employees, you answer to nobody. And if somebody, and if there's a way in which you're going to be removed, it's going to be by your choice or the choice of 8 members of the county council, not the administration, not some org chart over there. You determine your org chart, and we would like to see your organizational chart. So it would help us understand your authority and how you're going to wield that over in that office. The reason that office is so screwed up, and the reason the federal government came in to tell us it was so screwed up, was because the administration infiltrated the authority of the sheriff by placing people in there that had no business being in there. Now, those situations will work themselves out in court, and that's not over yet. But I got to tell you, I'm very disturbed to have heard that somebody's telling you that the charter as it exists doesn't mean anything. I will tell you it does. We'll carry on with this, and I'll have further discussion with you regarding this. But I will tell you, that is the exact reason that we're here for the 5th sheriff of Cuyahoga County, is that we didn't have anybody running the show. And our hope and prayer is that you will run the show. You will take the responsibility for the successes and those that aren't so great in success as we move forward. We're looking to you to bring us out of this doldrum. But I'll continue on with my colleagues, Ms. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Mr. President, and then Ms. Stevens, then Mr.
I just think it's important. I'm sorry, I just think it's important to echo what you just said. Mr. Violin, I read to you the county charter early on, not the county, but the ORC code. The sheriff shall have charge of the county jail. You are in charge. You are autonomous. Okay, perhaps collaborative with the administration. Most certainly, we are all here to work together, but you are autonomous, and that just needs to be reinforced so that we are all clear. And the organizational chart certainly is something that we do want to see. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tuma after Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens.
Thank you. You understand that council is very serious about your position, Mr. Violent.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
This is something that we all carry with us. You aren't in this job alone. You aren't in it just with the executive. Government is a team sport, as you know. And so collectively, we have made the decision that we want to participate with you, because when something goes right in the public sector, you know, we get 6 seconds in the news and then they move on. But when we do something wrong, we wear the jacket for that for months, if not years. And the next time we run for office, it's thrown in our faces. I'm a economic development and community development nerd. And if there's one thing I've learned in my tenure on council, is that I have to be concerned about jail and bail reform. And so this job, if you hear anything from my colleagues and myself, it is that how concerned we are about the performance that you will give to us in that leadership role. Important from my perspective is, what are your top couple of priorities, top 1 through 3 priorities for service? I know you haven't gotten there yet, but typically when you take on a new job, you think, these are the first couple of things I'm going to try and impact.
Sure.
What are they for you?
Thank you, ma'am. One of the things that I learned when I took over as the chief executive of a different organization when I was the chief of Solon was that much of my success was predicated upon the hard work of the people who had gone before me in setting up the best foundational aspects of running an organization. If the train tracks are laid down straight, then it's not that difficult to keep the train going. And so I truly value the foundational aspects of running an organization. So my thought process is, and I have discussed this with the current staff as well as executive, and that is that there are a couple of areas where I think it's important that I look at first. Number one is going to be the policy infrastructure. We want to ensure that what we are doing with regards to law enforcement policy is not only compliant with statutory and other standards, but actually active best practices. I have a concern that maintenance of policies and procedures is most law enforcement agencies' downfall, but it may be a weakness here, and it's one of my strengths. So actually looking at the policy foundations and making sure we've set up a system to go forward, it would probably be number one. Number two is going to be looking at the human aspects of the resources that are available. Such a huge percentage of what any organization pays is the people that they actually hire to do the job. So I want to ensure that we are doing staffing surveys and resource allocation surveys and understanding exactly where those people are best placed, how we can best support them in getting the job done, and ensuring that we're minimizing overtime and maximizing training and those kind of things. And then thirdly, I think it would also be important to talk about infrastructure. Not only is there facility infrastructure, the actual building and the grounds and all the things that go into that, but there's also an IT and information and technology infrastructure that needs to be looked at strongly, and how those different processes can and should be improved and integrated perhaps better with other systems. So I hope that answers your questions, but those would be the three primary focuses walking in the door would be policy, people, and then infrastructure.
That's actually an excellent response from my perspective. I have a question about item number 2. In my evaluation of what I saw since I've been a member of council, training was not something invested in by the sheriff's department or office. What do you think is appropriate training?
So I will just say, as a generality, training is never appropriately addressed in any law enforcement agency. It's one of those things that is easily cut in the budget. As long as the bad tragedy thing doesn't happen, it doesn't get noticed by the public or politicians. So there's not a lot of willpower to fund what it takes to actually train and support employees. We have to understand that for all intents and purposes, we are taking people with a high school diploma or equivalent education and an age limit, and we are entrusting them with people's lives. And we don't do that in any other profession. We don't do that with doctors. We don't do that with people in the military. So it's incumbent upon me not only to create training programs that will adequately support all different aspects of what the Sheriff's Department does, but then to communicate the value of that to the people that are sitting in your chairs to ensure that those are necessarily funded appropriately and the reasons why they are necessary. The other thing the other thing I would want to mention is I have to give kudos again to council and to the executive, because it's my understanding that we've already put together a countywide training program through Cuyahoga Community College that has a lot of de-escalation and bias-free policing and crisis intervention type things. I want to make sure that that gets attended by every employee at the Sheriff's Department. I've also already, one of the committees that I was on when I worked for the city of Cleveland was the Mental Health Resources Advisory Committee. And there are people from the Adams Board that served on that committee. So after I had turned in my notice, I reached out to them, and I have already discussed with them the fact that the Mental Health Diversion Center is going to have trainings available, and I'm going to want to make sure that those trainings are available and attended by everybody in the correction staff, as well as anybody else that we can get in there. Training is unfortunately often forgotten about, and it's truly one of the most important things that we can do on a daily basis.
Thank you. Thank you for your commitment to training. I learned about law enforcement by a former colleague of yours, Marty Lentz, who was police chief in Cleveland Heights forever.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so now you understand why training is so important to me.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
I actually went to Cleveland Heights Police Academy while Marty was the chief. So
then you understand.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Tuma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, congratulations on getting this far. You have very, very good credentials, and I'm glad. I appreciate many of your answers and a lot of what you provide coming from the heart. And I think we need somebody like that in this position at this time. Someone who's doing this for more than just a feather in his cap or her cap, but really is really vested in the position. And it sounds like you will be. I cannot reiterate enough, and you've heard this 2 or 3 times from the council president and the chairman. Mr. Sweeney was inquiring about it. I cannot emphasize enough the independent status of this position. Chief, we need you to be able to stand up for something that you believe in that possibly somebody else doesn't believe in, when you know it's the right thing to do or the right position to take. You emphasized or gave an example of a similar situation when you were chief in another position or in another law enforcement agency. It cannot be understated the importance of the independence of this position. If you want to go back and do some fun video watching, go back and look at our debates as to whether or not we should have this position as an elected position or an appointed position. And our reasons are stated in the record there. It's very important. And we went through this debate, and this is what we concluded as the best way to move forward with this sheriff's position, because we need someone who can be an independent voice when it's called for. And again, that's not to say, you have to disagree with the county executive on every issue and fight on every issue. By no means. We all want to move forward and work together. But, as far as the chain of command goes, you're the guy in charge of that jail. You're the top dog in that jail. And you have counsel as a backup in the event you feel uncomfortable or you feel there's something that's not right. You can come to council and you can have a public hearing. Or if the executive tries to remove you and you feel it's unjust, that's why we put this in the charter, okay? And that's why voters approved it. And I want to make it perfectly clear, if it's not been made clear enough, that yes, you are independent. Look at as an example of possibly the Inspector General. The Inspector General has a role. He does his job, irregardless of what people might think or what people might say. He does his role, and it's worked out well for the county on behalf of people. And that's what we expect. We need we need some stability in that jail. We need somebody who's a leader. We need somebody who's willing to sit there and say, no, that's wrong, or I'm not going to do that. And that's what we expect of you, Chief. And I feel comfortable that if we vote favorably on your appointment, that you'll be the guy to be able to do that for us at this time, because that's what we really need in the county right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuma. We've now gone through the first group. Is there anyone that has any follow-up questions for Chief Violent?
Mr. Chair? Yes.
Okay, we'll take Ms. Baker first. Jack, I believe I hear you. You go after.
It's okay.
Just quickly, I of course agree with all that was said, but I didn't hear back from you, Chief Violent, if you agree with that assessment, that you in fact are the buck stops here job, that that you're well aware that that is the expectation of your position. Is there any doubt in your mind that you are compromised at all by having to work with or please other people in order to fulfill your obligation?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is no. I mean, that's the simple answer. If there are any conflicts, I want you all to understand that my first oath is to the Constitution and the laws and the charter of the county. I pledge to adhere to doing the statutory duties, and more importantly, to just doing morally the correct thing. I will say that it's very apparent to me that there is a conflict between what the executive's office has told me, as well as what I am hearing today. And it's absolutely my, it would be my hope and it would be my request that any of those conflicts be resolved and decided between the two of you, so that in a collaborative way, you guys could all give me direction that you think is appropriate. I understand the way that it is laid out in the charter. I have served in a similar role. Regardless of whether I'm independent or not, there are so many interrelated aspects of the executive branch that I am going to have to work through and work with, that I can't be 100% independent. I'm not running my own finance department. I'm not running my own HR department. It is a very interrelated thing. And I have always been successful at working collaboratively to get those things done. Again, if there are conflicts, I would request that those be dealt with. I mean, currently I am a nominee, and you're asking, I think, me to make decisions about something I have no control over at this point. I absolutely have heard all of you. I absolutely understand the position that you have taken. I absolutely understand that there are differing ways to interpret many different things. But I still think that I have the ability to accomplish what you're looking for, and that is to be a leader of a department and its various divisions in a way where the buck stops at my desk. And I 100% understand that that is the position that I'm being put in.
Okay, Chair. Thank you for that, and thank you for your answer. It is a point of interest that needs to be set in stone. I don't think there's much room there for compromise. We certainly need to collaborate and get along and get things done and move forward, all of those things. But if you see something that you think you were told would be a good idea, and you say, I don't think so, I've been there, done that, this is not the right way. We've had prior testimony on the record saying that things were just swirling around me and I had no control. And this is what I was told to do, or I was told to step aside and let someone else make those decisions. And I felt obliged to do that. You don't want to hear that anymore.
Absolutely. And please understand that I am well aware that there are avenues for me to turn with regards to an independent inspector general's office, to the prosecutor's office, to the law department. There are a number of different places that I can turn to resolve conflicts at any point in time, including county council and its staff itself.
Thank you, Chair, for the time. Thank you for your answer.
Yes, ma'am. Jack Shrine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that even though he's our newest member of our council, he did pick up on a nuance that's I think is very important in that we are the only county that falls into this category that we are in. And I think it's very clear that you don't serve at the pleasure of the county executive, but you are very important, and you can tell the lawyer in you picked up that right this moment, you are not the county sheriff. You are serving truly at the pleasure at this very moment of the county council, of the county executives for the nomination only. Once that nomination is behind us, you no longer serve at the pleasure. You no longer are nominated at the pleasure. You serve at the best interest of the county in general. And we did everything we could to walk and create a new vision of what an appointed sheriff would look like. Independent, standalone, supermajority to replace the person. You are not going to be quite as independent as an elected sheriff would be, because we could still replace you by 8 people. So we think we've, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we think we did a pretty good job of walking down a thin line that was never, ever created any place in the state of Ohio for the 200 plus years. So we're not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we did a pretty good job of trying to create independence, not serving at the pleasure of the county executive or the county council, but it's a combination of what we've done. And we, as you probably have heard real clear, if there's something that's inappropriate, we expect that you are going to push back no matter where it's coming from. If it's not right, it's not right.
Absolutely. I agree with that statement 100%.
If you got to that point and you still were uncomfortable, would you find it so morally important that you would resign?
Well, you're asking me a hypothetical with no circumstances. So I find it very difficult to answer a hypothetical, but I will tell you that if there was something that was so abhorrent to my personal principles that I didn't feel that I could do it, I would absolutely resign.
Good. That's what I wanted to hear, actually. I threw out the hypothetical to see how you're going to answer the hypothetical. Lawyers do crappy things like that. I know we do sometimes. You mentioned Sheriff Pinckney, and you mentioned references to other. Prior to coming here today, have you talked with any of the other sheriffs and asked them about their relationship with council, with county executive? Did you ask them how that performed and what areas, so as to prepare you best for taking this job?
I did not have an opportunity to ever meet or speak with Sheriff Schilling. I did speak with Sheriff Pinckney, but this is a year or so ago prior. And then I have reached, or Sheriff Bova has reached out to me, and he and I have planned meetings. But we have not had specific conversations about council and the relationship of council with the department, mostly because most of that was prior to the charter change. So it wouldn't have been all that relevant at the time, I don't think, anyways.
I think it would be a good idea to listen to them and find out whether or not they felt they had the independence that we're telling you we believe you have.
Absolutely.
And the voters of this county clearly passed this overwhelmingly in favor of this independence that we've given, that they have given to you, not we. They've given to you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Anyone further?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Well, sir, I took a moment and I Googled how many law enforcement departments are there across this country. And it says 17,985. That's from local police, county sheriffs, state police, highway patrols, federal law enforcement agencies, 17,985. And I just said to myself, each one is unique, but collectively, each one is different. But to take a snapshot of each one across this country, there should be a mosaic of an image of what they should all have in common. And you've touched on some of those things in your opening comments. There should be one of, to use your words, of integrity, and professionalism. And I would add serving and protecting. Those are the things you would expect from your law enforcement agencies across this country. There's been a national conversation around reform. So I ask you the question, when we talk about the culture that's inside of the sheriff's department, specifically when the least employee is not turning a blind eye to wrongdoing, take a moment and tell me what would you do to improve the
Sure.
culture within the county sheriffs?
Sure. Thank you for the question, because it's something that I didn't get a chance to touch upon yet, but I think is very important. First, I want to say that cultural change is a process over time. It's not necessarily an event, and it's not necessarily quick. It does take time and perseverance. And I believe cultural change starts with an example set at the top. So I will give you an example of how important I think integrity is, and many people might find this kind of flippant, but I think it's really important. And that is, while I was the chief of police, I caused damage to my city vehicle backing up and parking. And the first thing that I did was I called the internal affairs people down, had them do a report, write me up, and turn me in for formal discipline. And there is formal discipline in my personnel file for violating a rule, negligent operation of a vehicle. That is exactly the type of integrity that I expect from everybody in the organization. And I think that there were probably people in the organization who thought I was silly for doing that. Why should I? I was the boss. I could have just had the car fixed and not worried about it. But that's not how I operate. And that's the type of example that I want to set for everybody. And I do think that eventually that does trickle down. With regard to turning a blind eye, I think that type of behavior is abhorrent. It is probably the biggest reason that law enforcement has failed society for decades. And I just wouldn't accept that. In my role as Inspector General, before I turned in my notice, I was serving on a committee that was developing an officer intervention policy. And part of that officer intervention policy was that peer intervention was required. It wasn't even optional. It was required that if you saw your peers doing something inappropriate or a violation, that you were required to intervene and to report. And those policies that we were developing, they melded very tightly with the Department of Justice approved policy, which prohibited retaliation and which protected whistleblowers. So I would plan to ensure that there's a clear path laid down for anybody to report wrongdoing internally, even if that's outside the formal chain of command, because we all know that sometimes it's the chain of command that may be being reported on. And that may not even be within the sheriff's department. It may be a collaboration that I work with the Inspector General's office. It may be some other avenue, but it's really important, I think, that we open those avenues of reporting. And I expect that peer employees will be holding each other accountable to stop bad actions immediately. One of the things that I found when you talk about discipline in an organization and people complaining about discipline being unfair, most of the formalized discipline in most places is relatively fair. What they're really complaining about is the people who are getting away without being disciplined. And that's a result of first line supervision and lack of accountability, letting people get away with stuff and not holding people accountable. And to me, that's unacceptable. Of course, all of this revolves around creating a culture where people are comfortable with the expectation that they intervene when necessary, and even more so that they're comfortable with making reports that are taken seriously and acted upon. But all of those are things that are very important, and things that I think as a culture change, we can start putting those building blocks in place.
You mentioned that law enforcement operations must be data-driven. You mentioned that earlier. This seems like an area where we would like to see, I would like to see how the culture is changing. Are people reporting? Do they feel safe in reporting? When you know you have to depend on your fellow coworker to do their job, have we created a culture where they can have that honesty and transparency and just reporting wrongdoing. Just again, being accountable for their actions. Next, I'd like to know your thoughts on qualified immunity.
So, as you know, sir, qualified immunity is one of those things that is for decades and decades been the purview of statutory law, as well as case law, precedential case law. Law enforcement in general doesn't have any ability to impact or affect the laws that are passed and the cases as they're ruled on. So I'm aware of the conversations that are going on. I try to stay as updated and informed as to what the status of different things are, especially locally in the state of Ohio. Those are the state laws that we have to observe with regards to things. But other than being aware of the conversation and observing the types of changes and arguments that are being made, I don't feel well informed enough to have a distinct opinion at this time.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, I just want to revisit the conversation Councilwoman Sunny Simon brought up, the subject of hate groups. Okay, when it comes to the hate groups, and if they are a part of our sheriff's department, okay, can you speak to not simply not hiring individuals, but if they are currently existing within? Do you have any experience with having removed individuals who are part of hate groups? What would be your approach with this issue in our sheriff's department?
Yeah, so from my experience as a law enforcement administrator, this is more relatively new than when I was actually in charge of termination decisions. But I will tell you that when I served as Inspector General for the city of Cleveland, some information was brought forward to me with regards to hate speech specifically. And I did the research that was required to show where there were violations of city policy, procedure, rules, and regulations, and recommended formal discipline for those actions moving forward. And that is absolutely something that I would do in a similar situation if it was in the sheriff's department.
Would tattoos be a consideration of what, as well? I've heard it said that some known hate groups, individuals wear tattoos, and would that be a consideration at all in the vetting process?
Yes, tattoos have always been a bone of contention in many law enforcement agencies. I worked in a law enforcement agency that prohibited tattoos, but as societal mores have changed, you don't want to necessarily cut down your candidate pool so much because so many people are getting tattoos for so many different reasons. So we restrict to visible tattoos when we can, and we restrict to the content of the tattoos. But that all has to do with well-developed policy that's put in place with the approval of the law department so that people's First Amendment rights are protected. And once that policy is put in place, just holding people accountable according to the policies. And that's just something I don't have enough direct experience with the sheriff's department to have a specific answer, but those would be my thoughts.
Gotcha. And I certainly am in no way an expert on this subject, but I can't help but reflect back on the events of January 6th and the National Guard and Capitol Police, when they prepared for the coming inauguration. They literally, and they said on TV, they removed individuals who they did not want to participate in the inauguration. Those officers that they decided that would participate in the inauguration. It was not done by policy or moving of dollars or any legislative act. They simply removed individuals so that they would have, as in their words, there would be no attack from within during the protection of the inauguration. And that type of, I'm going to use the word reform, it struck me that I would like to know more about that. So just as I understand you say it's a subject we all need to learn about, that was a national example of how and we saw it, the protecting of our government at that time and the actions that they took. I don't want to throw the word unilateral is the right word, but those departments used to, again, protect our government at that time. And I think it's worth further investigation than what was done in places like there and other places in the country. So I would like to see that conversation continue as well.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone further?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Conwell.
through the chair to Mr. Violin, I am very concerned about the health and well-being of the individuals incarcerated. Are you familiar with the county's jail current procedures regarding COVID testing of the inmates?
With apologies, ma'am, since I'm not on staff, I don't have any direct knowledge of some of those policies. So other than what I have seen in the media, I don't have a direct knowledge of that policy at this time.
Okay. With more than 3 decades in law enforcement, including your service as a magistrate, what changes have you seen that negatively impact the public's view of the justice system?
I think that over the last 3 decades, there has been a call for more accountability and for more openness in the process of law enforcement, which requires that all law enforcement officers everywhere, in order to be successful in this 21st century, it's not enough that we have the knowledge and the training, but it's also incumbent upon us to share that knowledge and training with the people that we come into contact with. And a lot of that has to do with open discussions and respect, and education and conversation with people as to what is going on and why it is going on and the options that are available. And those are all things that, it's the 21st century policing, the pillars of 21st century policing that came out several years ago, but that's all new compared to when I started in this. And the fact that we haven't, as law enforcement, necessarily lived up to some of those new standards has hurt us in people's eyes. And people, I think, do have some negative reflection upon law enforcement because of that.
On that same note, what about in the terms of the rights of the accused?
I'm sorry, ma'am, you cut out partway through that question.
On the same basis, what about the rights of the accused? What changes have you seen that negatively impact the rights of the accused?
Actually, I would have to say all of the changes that I have seen have been more towards the positive. And one of the most concrete examples is the way that we look at people who were involved in the sex trades with regards to criminality. There was a period of time where those people were looked at as criminals that needed to be processed through the system in a punitive way. And we have learned over the decades that very often there are so many other things that play into that, human trafficking issues, et cetera, and so on, so that very often we're dealing with victims and not criminals. And that's just one area where I actually see that a lot of the changes that have been implemented are actually helping of people. When we passed Marcy's Law a couple cycles ago in the election cycle, the way that we notify and treat victims is actually better than it's ever been if we actually do meet the standards that are required by the Constitution and the law. There's just a number of places where I think that we actually have done better by victims than we ever have in the past. Whether we get full credit for that or not, I can't say.
And one more, same question. What changes have you seen that negatively impact the perception of our police officers?
The officer's perception of the job, the officer's perception of the system. Be a little bit more clear for me, please.
Okay, so we're talking about you had 3 decades in law enforcement, and from your magistrate's hat, so to speak, the perception of what changes have you seen that negatively impact the perception of the police officers?
As I said to the first part of your question, and that is that expectations are higher and standards are higher. And very often the roles that we put our law enforcement into are roles that didn't exist decades ago. Decades ago, we didn't carry around Narcan to assist people who were in overdose situations. So the burden of the job has increased. The standards that we're expected to live up to have increased. And unfortunately, often we don't meet those standards. And when people see that we're not meeting standards, that is probably the biggest contributor to people's perception of what it is that we do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone further?
One very brief one, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to the chief. It's been 2 hours, so I won't belabor this. And this is nothing holding your feet to the fire, but is it your intention to do more than one term?
I don't have any reason not to. I hadn't thought of this. I hadn't thought of this as a term position. My plan was just to be here for as long as people thought I was of value.
Perfect. I just was, because some people I just want to do one term and I'm out, but that's not your intention.
No, sir.
Thank you very much for all your time today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Anyone further? Well, Chief, this has been one of our, I believe, longer confirmation hearings. Congratulations. Some tough questions, and we fully, expect that to have sometimes happen. As you did notice that your one answer did pique the interest of many of the council members. And the more I think about it, it's probably a little unfair to you when you're being told one thing and the reality is another that you really wouldn't know. So I think what we'll do, and I'll discuss this with the president, maybe we should go back with the law department and clearly define what the charter is saying. We know what it says. Mr. Toomey made a recommendation that you go back when we debated whether or not to go to the ballot or to maintain this position as an appointed position. Probably some of the best debate that this council has ever had. I will be upfront and tell you I was on the opposite end. I was all for electing a sheriff, and that was supported by every law enforcement individual in the state of Ohio and Cuyahoga County. But it is what it is. We're where we're at, and hopefully the buffer that we placed in there in the charter will at least give you some comfort as to what we're expecting from you. There's nothing that any of us can do individually, and we all recognize that. Problems were had over at the jail, and I can assure you that the council had no hand in that. But we stand ready to offer any help that we can. We tell this to everybody. We've told it to every sheriff that's come through here. When we did meet, I recommended that you talk to Sheriff Reed, Sheriff Bova, in particular Sheriff Pinckney and Sheriff Schilling, and you will find out, I think, that when push comes to shove and things go wrong, while at times they answer to a organizational chart, they became the apple of the eye of people looking to blame them for the problems. We're not looking to blame anybody. We're looking to support the sheriff of Cuyahoga County independent of the council, independent of the administration, and arguably responsible and answerable to the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County, and especially those within your care. I would ask you, because having worked in Cuyahoga County now for, I hate to admit how many years, but close to 50 years now, people are pretty close. People talk. You have good people in the building. You have good staff. You have dedicated individuals that do probably one of the most difficult jobs, as you well know, that Cuyahoga County has. They're looking for leadership. They're looking for someone that's going to stand for them. And my hope is that you would be that person. I have every thought that you can be that person. But please, if you have time, talk to the previous sheriffs. I think your eyes will be open to not just some of the problems that the jail had, but some of the problems that they had. And they may include some of the problems they had with the council. I don't know because I haven't talked to them, but I'm comfortable enough to tell you to do that, to get that background. I'm glad you mentioned the portion where we provided funds to do the de-escalation classes with Tri-C. We on the council side thought it's so important, and I'm glad to hear that it's important to you also. So if you could just take what little I've told you and asked you under wing, think about it. I don't necessarily mean to throw anybody under the bus. The administration has done good things over there. They have jumped in and tried to figure out some of the problems. We had a new chief of staff, and that, believe it or not, helped turn the jail around, I think, immeasurably. But now is time for a sheriff to walk in, be the sheriff, run the show, and be responsible for probably one of the more important things that we provide to the citizens of Cuyahoga County. I personally wish you the best of luck. We will get that legal opinion to hopefully put you at ease as to what responsibilities or whom you answer to. Once you're sworn in, the bottom line is, from this council, who is the only group that can get rid of you, is that we don't want to get in your way. We want to get out of your way. We don't want to dictate to you. We want you to tell us what you need, and we will provide to you what you need when you need it as you see fit. And I think our history as a council supports that statement. So if no one else has anything further, I will ask for any discussion regarding moving this nomination to the council.
Chairman, I would like to move that this goes to the council for approval at whatever's the next appropriate time. If it's at the next meeting, I would be happy to do that.
I have a motion for Mr. Schrein to move the appointment of Mr. Violin forward.
Second, Miller.
With Mr. Schrein, second by Mr. Miller. Mr. Schrein, would you say that is a motion under first reading suspension?
Absolutely. If that is what the chair is willing to accept, I would move that that was what my intent of the motion.
Thank you. And again, the second by Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I am. We've had a good hearing today.
Is there further discussion regarding this? Can I hear from council members? Are we okay with moving forward?
I'm okay, Mr. Chair, Conwell, but if you could let us know before council tomorrow or the law department that they've had a conversation with Mr. Violin in regards to what you stated.
Actually, what we'll do is our staff attorneys will contact the law department, and we'll get something drafted clearly outlining the position as the charter dictates. So hopefully, I would like to I want to make sure we take our time and do that right. I don't want to do anything wrong at this point in time. We all know what's in the charter. We all know what it says, and we all know what our expectations are. But to help Mr. Violin out and the administration, who clearly are still under the impression that the old way is the same way, we need to all be on that same page.
I would just prefer before we vote that, that he's clear.
I've made the request, and I know Doyle and Boyle are on that. So we'll see what they can come up with by tomorrow.
And Chair, if I
Thank you,
could, along with Councilwoman, I would like to have confirmation from the candidate that they do in fact understand it, agree with it. There's no confusion, no misunderstandings, that there's no unaware, I didn't know. I would like to have some confirmation after that is prepared and presented, that there is no doubt that this is what in fact, and I think that's what Councilwoman Yvonne was trying to get to or did do, and I just didn't hear it, that we want to not only see the document, but we want confirmation from the candidate that this is in fact what I understand.
Well, the document is the charter, and again, unfortunately, I was on the opposite side of this, so I really didn't get that involved. I think we're comfortable. I'm just concerned that the administration was saying something to the nominee that doesn't hold true to this is our first attempt with the new charter amendment to put a sheriff into place, for the most part. For Schilling was kind of it, but not it. This is our first full-fledged, in my opinion. So we're going to get that. I don't think it should hold this up, because the charter is what the charter is, and that's what it states, and that's what we rely on. But I think to make the nominee comfortable in his position moving forward, that he would need that if confronted by someone outside of his organizational chart telling him what to do, which none of us anticipate is going to happen.
I guess my concern is that there's no surprises by the nominee, that we go ahead and confirm and realize that this might be what the charter said, but I honestly wasn't led in that direction. And I'm not sure now what my authority is, or I'm not sure that I can work within that authority. I guess I just want some confirmation, because does seem to be a difference of opinion here, that we do get confirmation from the candidate that they in fact understand it, read it, and are fully ready to move independently.
Well, I
Mr.
think it's
Chairman?
important to get a clarification, but when you're taking the oath, you swear to abide by the Constitution and the Charter of Cuyahoga County. It's in the charter. So when you're taking an oath, it's an oath. The clarification, and I know his earlier answer to Mr. Sweeney's question has raised great concerns amongst council, as it did I think now that it's been made clear to Mr. Violin where we're at and what the reality is. But I think we need to get a legal opinion so he's comfortable moving forward. The last thing I want is him to go in there and to have what has happened in the past, have a sheriff being controlled by people like, well, I won't even mention his name because he hasn't gone to court yet, and undercutting the duly appointed sheriff. That was the whole purpose of the amendment. That none of us are going to stand for that. And I can say from what I've heard here, I suspect if we suspect and confirm that an appointed sheriff is not following the charter, that 8 votes are going to show up pretty quickly, and it's going to be the end of that. I don't anticipate that. But to help someone who is new to this, who would be Mr. Violin, I think to be more clear as to what the charter says and where we're going to go with this is going to be helpful. Mr. Tuma?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, appreciate that. if legislative intent means anything, I think everybody on council knows exactly where we stand on this issue with respect to the independent quality of the position. If folks would feel more at ease, I mean, we could hold it for another meeting if that would make people feel more at ease. But I think it's clearly stated in the charter what the position is here. Where we all stand on this.
Right.
Mr. Gallagher?
I don't know if there's an appetite to hold it. Let me, someone asked to speak?
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes, Mr. Violet.
I just want to tell you, first of all, how much I appreciate the conversation that's going on and the discussions that you're having with regards to this issue. It truly means a lot to me. And I do and would appreciate moving forward a concrete direction of the type that you're discussing. And that would be very valuable to me moving forward. So I just want to let you know, I appreciate that and thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. President?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Violent's comments earlier in this presentation, and I'll repeat, maybe not word for word, but he said he understands the position that he has, and he would like it if the administration and this legislative body could come together with the understanding. I think that might be the most wise advice we've gotten, although we did ask most of the questions. We have an opportunity to do as we've asked of him, that we work collaboratively with the administration and be on the same page. I think we can do that. I think he has heard us very clearly, and I think he is well positioned to be effective in the job. And we today, I'll say this, we know it's on the agenda for tomorrow for first reading adoption. So I certainly would not consider holding anything. This is actually a discussion. This is not legislation on the agenda. It is on tomorrow's agenda. So we've done our formality and we've was giving away our vote today, but we're not actually officially voting in this discussion item. So I would say that we are looking to move forward even tomorrow with the first reading adoption.
Mr. Jones, what I'll do is, and I think this will be helpful, is what we can do is create an ordinance amending the county code to codify the discussions that we're having today. That should take care of any gray areas regarding the charter. And we can work that timely through committee and then through the council of a whole. That should satisfy, I believe, number one, the charter satisfies the question. Number two, if we do an ordinance to codify this discussion, I think it's belt and suspenders regarding the charter. So I hope that makes sense, and that kind of helps people that might be a little concerned.
Looking at the county code
Sure.
is a viable option. That's a little wider discussion, and we can look at that
Right.
down.
Right, but it'll help everybody, and it'll help everybody involved, and everybody will, including the administration, have input when we debate it.
Yeah, we can certainly have that in a larger discussion.
Sure.
We are ready to, I believe, to move forward.
Did I hear
Mr. Chair, we can't ask.
One comment.
Ms. Conwell?
Mr. Chair, we can't ask the executive and the law department tomorrow before we
No.
vote on it. Armin should be on.
I'm told no.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think that
Consideration.
without over lawyering the thing, there is a risk if you put this in writing. I think we should ask counsel beforehand, our legal counsel, because if the county executive heard something today, let's not say there was anything bad or one way or the other, I believe he could still withdraw his nomination, in which case all of this conversation is moot. So we've got lawyers on our staff. I think that we should not, we can push that after we've adopted and we've adopted this resolution and put him Mr. Violent as our county sheriff at that point in time. Then we can make it rock solid clear. But at this moment in time, I believe that the county executive could still withdraw his nomination. And
Well, it is our legal department that's recommending the ordinance amending the county code to codify this discussion through committee. And regardless of who the nominee is, we probably should do it because we have a misunderstanding, people not understanding the charter. The council doesn't misunderstand the charter. It was relayed to the nominee that the charter evidently said something else. We know differently.
I would like to hope that he just maybe overstated that his nomination serves at his pleasure until such time as this person is confirmed. After,
Quite possibly, but like you say,
I'll give him a break as far as
I think we're at a point where I personally would like to get a sheriff seated and we can clean up. And this is, I see this just as kind of cleaning up. We can do that in a reasonable fashion, and we want to do it in an academic fashion. So anyone else regarding moving forward? I have a motion and a second to move forward with this nomination tomorrow under first reading suspension. Any other input?
Nope.
Hearing none. Clerk, if you'd call the roll, please. And this is to move Christopher Violent forward. Or, I'm sorry. Chief Violent. Clerk?
Andrea, you're muted.
You ready to move forward? We need a roll call?
Yes. Calling the roll, Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Affirmative.
Mr. Tuma,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Schron,
yes.
Ms. Conwell, sorry,
Maybe. Yes.
Wow.
Ms. Brown, Ms. Brown, okay, just seeing if she's here, still on the call. Maybe we've lost her. Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Simon,
Yes.
Ms. Baker,
Yes.
and Mr. Jones, Council President Jones.
Yes.
Okay, we have 10 out of 11.
Okay, and Ms. Brown is gone.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say to Chief Violent, it's nothing against you. I just know I've worked in this with this administration for a while, and I just want things to be clear. So my hesitancy to vote for you is not on your qualifications or you wanting this position, but for you to be clear from the start and very start that this is what we expect as a county council for the people. I mean, we have people in there that are human beings in the jail and they need to be treated right. And that means allowing you or whoever the sheriff is at that time to feel free to come to the legislative body to talk to us about funding that needs to be placed in there. So please don't take it personal. I just want to be clear on this to make sure that you're clear and you know who you need to answer to. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, I believe clerk was at 10-0.
10-1. I'm sorry, 10. Yes, and we haven't heard back from Council Member Brown.
Okay.
So but the motion carries and the resolution can be on the council's tomorrow's agenda for first reading adoption under suspension of the rules.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for their time and especially Chief Island. Congratulations on one further step. We will see you tomorrow, and congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any miscellaneous? We're adjourned.